Welcome to the Chiron Speaks podcast. I'm your host, Sarah. This is a deep dive into the wounds we carry and the light they can become. Episode 4, The Face We Show the World. To dive right in, there's the self you wake up with and the self you walk into the world with. So I want to gently redefine what the word mask means, especially when it comes to like astrology and how you present yourself to the world. It's a coping tool. It's also a form of identity armor. A lot of the time, I know sometimes people might not like the word mask, but I think because it always has a connotation of being fake or two-faced, and that's not what I mean in this context, at least in this like episode of this podcast where we kind of talk about the mask also kind of being your ascendant sign, right? Because when we first meet someone, and usually the first impression that people have of us is not fully who we are. It's only one side of us. And you could say a mask is one side of us, you know? And I would just like offer this quote to kind of begin the discussion. We wear masks not to hide who we are, but to protect what's sacred. Because you don't always want to show all your cards in your hand immediately, you know? When you meet someone for the first time, you're not going to trauma dump on them and tell them all your secrets and your trauma and everything you've gone through and all your childhood issues. Like, people do that to strangers. And people do that because there's a security or there's a comfort in knowing that I probably won't ever see this person again. But for people you think, like, if it's going to be like a coworker, a mutual friend, a potential partner, so on and so forth, if it's going to be someone that you're being introduced to that you're going to have to spend time around, you reveal yourself slowly or eventually. You know, you don't really kind of present all of who you are to any one person all at once. And the one side that they see of you typically is your ascendant sign, which is also can be considered a mask. So I would just implore you to not take mask as a negative thing, because I feel like sometimes people take mask as a negative thing and they just feel like I'm just trying to throw. Basically, people hear the word mask and then they really hear the word two-faced and they think I'm just saying that, oh, you're two-faced, you're two-faced, you're two-faced, and that's not what I'm doing. What I'm saying is that when you are first introducing yourself and who you are as a person, your first impression usually is your ascendant sign, which is one side of you. And that's all I'm saying with that. Not trying to offend anyone or anything like that. So, the mask as the ascendant. Your rising sign is how the world first perceives you. It's not fake, it's your default energetic filter. So think of it as that. It's your filter that you first kind of come off with. And so I'm going to go through each rising sign to kind of talk about what kind of energy you might present depending on your rising sign, you know? So we have Aries rising, comes off bold with so much energy, but maybe protecting sensitivity because their feelings are so raw and pure. And then we have Taurus rising, where someone with this rising sign might show up as strong, stable, and stubborn, but may withhold their need to feel secure and held by loved ones. Gemini rising can be very friendly, adaptable, and clever, but struggle to have the confidence to communicate what's on their minds. Cancer rising can be sympathetic, receptive, and even psychic, but may respond to life through feeling, not thinking, with moods that change with the tides. Then we have Leo rising, self-confident, romantic, courageous, and extroverted, may carry wounds of anger and past hurts to their dignity or pride. Libra risings, artistic, creative, and sociable, but may hide inner conflict and try too hard to please others and negate their own principles for the sake of the group, for the sake of the collective. Scorpio rising, reserved, hard to understand, self-controlled, self-reliant, and may struggle with feelings of vulnerability, resentment, and jealousy. Sagittarius rising, breezy, outgoing, of the outdoors, and restless, but may lack in diplomacy, prefer casual versus depth due to comfortable feelings of vulnerability or having like a discomfort with vulnerability. Capricorn rising presents as composed, ambitious, and ethical, but may carry deep emotional weight and feelings of I can't say that word. Inadequacy. There we go. Aquarius rising. Come off intuitive, intelligent, and having a good mind, but may be cold and calculating where feelings are concerned. And then last but not least, we have Pisces rising, super sensitive, affectionate, sympathetic, and extremely psychic, but may dream through life rather than live in it and struggles to be practical. So your ascendant sign is, you could say, is your survival suit in early life, becomes more conscious over time. So, from what I've heard too, also is like your ascendant sign is definitely something that is present in earlier in life. I believe it's, I don't know exactly where I heard this from, but I believe it's true because once you kind of go through your Saturn return, which is around the time you're 29, it's almost like your ascendant sign pretty much kind of melts into your whole entire personality. You know, because at first your ascendant sign is very obvious and prevalent when you're much younger, because like I was mentioning before, your ascendant sign is kind of what you could say is your default energy and how you kind of approach the world, and also more specifically how you get your needs met. So honestly, we first learned how to get our needs met as children. And you can kind of say that is where the ascendant sign kind of like starts to take show, is that default energy of trying to figure out like, how do I present myself? How do I act? How do I move in order to get my needs met? Doesn't that sound like the ascendant sign, you know? So, but as you get older and as you become more of an adult and you go through your first Saturn return and you get past 29, once you're like over the age of 29, your ascendant sign starts to melt into the whole part of your personality, where people maybe when they first meet you, once you start to be in your 30s, your 40s and beyond, especially if you go, if you're older than, 58, because around 58, that's when you have your second Saturn return. So it's almost as if your ascendant sign completely melts into the rest of your personality. People might not only just see your ascendant sign when they first meet you. They might get a little bit of your moon, a little bit of your sun, you know, a little bit of your Mars, you know, a little bit of your, maybe even a little bit of your Saturn, depending on how much older you are and how close you are to maybe retirement or something like that too. So, yeah, your mask is kind of what you kind of put on. It's more of like more of a younger energy, to have that be the only energy that is like presented at first. Because I kind of go back to that quote, or that like that whole saying of like, when I was a child, I thought like a child, I acted like a child, I spoke like a child, but once I became an adult, I put away those childish things. And one of the childish things you could kind of say, even though that having a mask in your ascendant sign is not necessarily childish, but it's like, it's something you rely on as a child to make sure your needs are met. Once you're an adult and you're able to kind of provide your own needs, then that might not be, your ascendant sign is not as something, it's not as much of a thing you lean on, you know, to make sure your needs are met. So, why we needed the mask in the first place. Protection in childhood. People-pleasing tendencies stem from childhood. This is how we got our needs met. It is a way of behaving so that others will respond to you the way you need and want them to. As children, our behavior signaled our needs. So like, as I was saying, like our ascendant sign, our mask, is also kind of the way we behaved and the way we acted was the way we got our needs met from our caregivers. Children, especially babies, young children, small children, they hardly can do anything for themselves. So entirely they depend on the adults around them to take care of them, right? So, that energy that you kind of step into in order to like get your needs met is your ascendant sign. And I think that's also another thing I wanted to talk about is that, like, I get so annoyed because I hate when people are like, oh, people pleasing tendencies are like, are so manipulative and da 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 da. And like, yes, it is a form of manipulation, but you kind of have to understand that what is it rooted in? It's rooted in a person who's kind of not reverting back to childhood, but it's like your brain goes back to default mode. Like when your needs are not met, you kind of almost like step in your child brain or your infant brain, you know? How do I get my needs met? You know what I'm saying? Like usually you would cry, you know? And then as you get older, you kind of figure out that I don't need to cry to get my needs met, you know? I just like find some income. Once I have income, I go to the store and I get food, you know, like it's not as much of like when you were a baby where you would just cry and a bottle would show up. So it's different obviously from when we were children and as adults, but I digress. What I'm really trying to say is that like that's what people are really kind of stemming from, is like the people pleasing tendencies comes from childhood. It comes from someone who figured out that this is how I get my needs met from my parents or from my caregivers, is that I have to please them through my behavior, the way I speak, the way I do things. Like, it's easier for me to get what I need if I do what they want me to do. And yes, it's manipulative, but it kind of like stems from childhood. We were kind of like, sometimes people are conditioned to behave a certain way to get their needs met, you know? Hey, Johnny, if you get straight A's, you know, we'll get you your favorite ice cream, you know? Like, we're kind of conditioned from a young age to behave and act a certain way to get the things that we want. What kid doesn't want ice cream? Most of the time, you know what I'm saying? So it's like, we're gonna do whatever we can do to get the ice cream, to get the toy, to get the candy, you know, to get the things that we want. We're gonna do whatever we can as children to get those things, you know? So you can't really blame the donkey for chasing the carrot when it is in the donkey's nature to want a carrot, if that makes sense. And I think that's the thing where I kind of feel like people kind of make it a sinister thing or a manipulative thing, you know? But I think when it kind of becomes, you could truly say it's manipulative when someone really knows what they're doing. It's different if you're kind of going back to your subconscious default setting and you're trying to people please to get your needs met. That's different if someone who's not like conscious of what they're doing. If you're actively trying to manipulate someone, if you're actively like, you know what you're doing, that's when it kind of becomes manipulative, a little bit more sinister. You could kind of use those more negative, heavy words when you're trying to describe someone who's actively, purposely, consciously aware. But if that's something that you kind of fall back into and you got to be like, oh wait, you got to wake yourself up and you got to check yourself, or someone around you loves you enough or cares about you enough to be like, hey, I think you're kind of people pleasing a little bit. You might want to step back or maybe put some boundaries or whatever. Like, if you're not conscious of it, then once you are conscious of it and you do better, then great. But I feel like it's a little harsh to judge someone who's literally just falling back into a default setting that they're not even consciously aware of. So that's why I'm just saying, like, people need to really be careful of that. And I'm going to get off on that tangent, but I just want to make that clear because it really gets on my nerves where people are trying to be like, oh, people pleasing, da da da. And it's just like, hold up. Where is this really coming from? Because people pleasing that's been ingrained in us from childhood to do that. Our teachers, the lunch lady, the people who are watching us at recess, like every adult I could remember when I was young was always trying to curve or change or do something or adjust or distract me from behavior and wanted me to act a certain way because it made their lives easier. This just is what it is, you know? So the true problem lies, it's only a problem when we forget we're wearing the mask and when it no longer fits. And then I think that's like what I'm saying is like once you kind of become conscious of the ways you're moving and behaving to get needs met when you don't necessarily need to do that anymore, that's when it becomes the problem, you know? So, Chiron's role in unmasking. Chiron often touches the parts we hide behind the Ascendant. The Chiron rune may feel like if they see the real me, they'll leave. So there's like kind of like a fear of abandonment, and this is where Chiron kind of comes in, because if you had listened to the previous episodes, I'll just kind of rehash the same information, but Chiron's first wound was being abandoned by his parents. The second wound was the poisoned arrow that was shot in his thigh by Hercules. He had 2 wounds, and the first wound was abandonment. So you could kind of say that the goal is to have like a secure attachment versus like the anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachments that I had talked about, I think in like episode 3 or 2. But the goal is to have a secure attachment. Even if that wasn't what you developed in childhood, that's something that you can develop in adulthood, is to learn how to accept that maybe not everyone is for you, that maybe the people are meant to kind of walk away. But then also when people walk into your life, you know, you're not anxious or avoidant, you're not nervous about this person leaving, but then you're also not distant because you're also afraid of them leaving as well. You know, it's just enjoying people's the time and space that you get to spend with people as you spend it, and also kind of feeling free and understanding that not everything lasts forever, and if that relationship ends or if it changes, to kind of accept that as is. And that's a part of having secure attachment, is knowing that you are lovable, and maybe not everyone is meant to love you in every season of your life, you know? And I think that's why it's hard sometimes for people to remove the mask. And that's why I say, let's not shame people for defaulting into wearing their mask, because that's what they're used to doing. That's how they got their needs met as a child. You could kind of say like that's like someone who developed an anxious attachment style as a child. Maybe that's a part of their mask, is falling and defaulting into that anxious attachment style. And that's why I say, like, let's not judge or shame people who kind of default into that, because it takes a lot of healing. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of conscious effort. It takes a lot of, like, sleepless nights and learning yourself and being accountable, which not a lot of people feel very comfortable doing. And it's a lot of work, you know? It's a lot of heartache. To kind of go through the skeletons that is in your closet and kind of like sift through all of them to really kind of understand why you are and why you function the way you do. It can be sometimes digging into your own trauma, which could be also traumatizing in itself, because you're re-traumatizing yourself when you kind of dive into and you speak on your trauma. Your body, your mind feels like you're experiencing all that stuff all over again. It's not easy to heal. The healing journey is not an easy thing. So, healing happens when we integrate the mask, not just remove it. We understand that the mask is a part of us, but it's not something that we need anymore. You know, hopefully, like, as we become adults, we could fulfill our own needs. We don't need caregivers, or hopefully you don't need caregivers or whatever. Like, everyone has their own, like, path and issues and stuff like that. But at least, like, I feel like most people, you're still not in that infancy stage where you need someone to bring you a bottle, where you have to cry and someone brings you a bottle, you know? So it's just kind of understanding that your mask needs to kind of melt into the rest of your personality. You might still go out in the world and you might still kind of function in the way that you did as a child to get your needs met, you know? So I would just encourage you to kind of really, like, see yourself and really like have self-awareness and just see like, how do I show up in relationships? How do I show up at work, in my friendships, in my romantic relationships and partnerships? How do I show up? When I need something from someone, how do I approach that? How do I ask for what I want? You know, and see if it's the same way that you also got those needs met as a child. If it's changed, then it's like, also kind of see how maybe you've changed over time. And, to see how you might have already, incorporated your mask into it's already probably melted into the rest of your personality, because you might only revert here and there to childhood, or, you know, I'm trying to find the best way to explain this, but for instance, like if Chiron is in your first house, you may over-identify with the image or fear of rejection, you know? So kind of look at where your Chiron is, the house and the sign, and that can kind of pinpoint, do I still struggle in this area, and how do I make this better? And that is a way of practically trying to melt your mask into your whole entire personality, so that that's not all that people see when they first meet you. So, I want to talk about like when the mask is necessary, because sometimes having a mask is necessary. Sometimes you need to put that on, not all the time, but and that's the thing. We don't need it all the time, and it's not as much of a need as when we were children. So like think about like your first day on the job, you know, when you're first, or when you're on an interview or a first date, or when you're meeting the in-laws, you know, you don't show people all of who you are. And honestly, like, if you see yourself as someone who might be, like, unique, special, or you put a lot of work into who you are as a person, whether that's internally, externally, whatever, like, if you take pride in who you are and the healing that you've done as a person, you're not going to show all your cards to people, you know? You're not going to, if you see yourself as someone who is, worth knowing, you're not gonna present all of who you are to someone right away. And people, I remember someone in my life telling me, like, sometimes people don't deserve to see all of you. Some people don't deserve to know all of who you are, you know? Some people don't get that because maybe they're not ready for that. Or maybe if you did reveal all of who you are, they would either hurt you, take advantage of you. Like, some people are not in the space time to really truly accept and appreciate someone who is further along in their healing journey than others, right? So I would say, like, think about those moments in time where it's like, if you're talking to your boss at work, you know what I'm saying? You're not going to talk to your boss like you talk to your best friend. You're not going to talk to your best friend like you would a judge, or you wouldn't talk to a judge like you would talk to your mom. Like, I feel like there's a place and a time for everything, and that kind of switch in tone definitely does change. You know, you don't go to work. Most people, not going to say most, but, a lot of jobs you're not allowed to cuss at work. So that's one thing. If cussing is part of your MO and your personality, then, but if you can't do that at work, you're not going to do that at work, right? So that's what I'm kind of saying, like, or like, say, like, if you have kids or something like that, if cussing is part of your language, sometimes people cuss in front of their kids because that's just who they are. They can't filter. But sometimes, like, you try to make sure that, like, hey, I don't want my kid going to go into class and getting in trouble because of my mouth. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just kind of making it clear that, like, there's a time and a place for everything, and we can't always be who we are to everyone. It's also a protection thing. It's also who you are is a sacred thing. So you're not going to reveal the most sacred parts of yourself to people where that is not appropriate or you don't feel safe to, you know? So, so yeah, that I definitely feel like those moments will kind of like give you an understanding of of yourself, your worth, your visibility, you know, who you want to be visible to and who's worthy of seeing all of who you are. Not everyone is worthy of seeing that, you know? So, I leave this kind of couple of questions like, what energy do you lead with when you enter a room? What parts of you are still backstage? And a couple of things to journal about, like, my rising sign helps me, but sometimes I wish I could ... What would those things be, you know, that your rising sign helps with, but things that you wish you could do when you first are like making an impression? And then imagine meeting yourself without your audition outfit on. So, you are allowed to be seen even when you're not performing. And I just kind of want to leave you with that. So, of course, like, if you can, subscribe, share, comment. And then the next episode, episode 5, I'm going to talk about, we're going to explore the wound of being too much or not enough. So with that, I want to say thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.